I've lived in a relatively big city all my life, so when my company asked me to relocate to a small town in the middle of nowhere, I wasn't too happy about it. I argued that I could just work remotely with the team there, but my superior was adamant about having face-to-face meetings and building better team cohesion and collaboration. They argued that I could stay in my current residing place, but would need to switch teams and my entire role, so eventually I picked the lesser evil, to move out into the aforementioned small town. Since I had to bite the bullet, I figured I'd try to make the best of the given situation. Maybe moving to a small town would be a good change of pace. The first thing I noticed when moving was that the rent was a lot cheaper, so I could afford a big house all to myself, which lifted my spirits a little. Another thing that was a big plus for me was the fact that traffic there was pretty much non-existent. My new house was in a peaceful part of the town. The entire town was peaceful, but my area more so. And since my previous apartment was on an avenue with lots of noise, this tranquility was refreshing. As soon as I arrived and unpacked, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a man with a huge grin on his face stood in front of me. With his glasses, slick hair, and tidy clothing, he looked like a typical suburban dad. "Hi there, my name's Jim," he said perkily, the smile never leaving his face. "I live across the street. I'm guessing you're Chris, right?" Yeah. I was taken aback. "How did you know that?" He chuckled and said, "Oh, sorry about that. This is a small town, as you already know, and news travels fast. I mean, when I got my letter from the court, my neighbors knew it before I did." I gave him a weak chuckle and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Jim. So listen, my wife makes great cupcakes, so she'll probably bring you some later as a welcome gift." "Oh, that's not really... Afternoon, Clara." Jim waved to a young woman walking her dog down the street. "Taking Rex for an early walk today, huh?" "Yeah, he was really impatient today." Clara smiled widely and looked at me and said, "Oh, hi there. You must be our new neighbor." I waved back and introduced myself. "I'll be sure to stop by later so we can say proper greetings," she said before having the leash in her hand tugged by the dog. She let the dog take the lead and shouted back, "Would love to stay longer, but Rex is in a hurry. Bye for now." She waved and went down the street. Jim waved back and then turned back to me and said, "That's Clara. She lives down the street in that pink house over there. She runs a book club and has the ladies of town join once a month for some wine and book discussion. But my wife Sarah says they mostly focus on the wine and gossiping." He chuckled and I smiled back out of courtesy. "So, listen," I said. "I gotta go unpack the rest of my things, so, Oh, yeah. Oh, I totally understand. Hey, if you need any help, don't hesitate to call me. I'll be home all day long." "Thanks, Jim. Have a good one," I said, seeing Jim's friendly and smiling face before I awkwardly closed the door. He seemed like a nice guy, but I was tired and irritated from the long trip and just wanted to take a break. After taking a short nap, I decided I would go explore the town. I knew there wasn't much to be seen, but I wanted to spend my time somehow, since I didn't have any work for the day. As soon as I got outside and locked my front door behind me, I heard a voice from the pavement. "Hi, neighbor." I turned around and saw an elderly lady standing in front of it with a wide smile. She held a plastic food container in her hands. "Hello, ma'am," I smiled back. "My name's Chris." "Oh, I already know, dear," she said and approached me. "Here, I made you some homemade chocolate chip cookies." She handed the plastic container to me, still smiling widely. "Wow, thank you, ma'am. That's really kind of you," I said. "You can call me Marcy," the lady said. Maybe living here wouldn't be so bad, I thought to myself. Marcy stared at me with her big smile in anticipation, So I took it as a cue that I should check her cookies out. I removed the lid and was a little disappointed to find that the cookies were mint flavored, but I tried one in front of her nonetheless and told her how great they tasted. "Oh, you should try my lasagna. That will blow you away, dear." She gently put her hand on my wrist and chuckled. "Well, I have to get going. My grumpy husband will be angry if he doesn't get lunch in time. Have a good day, dear." "Thank you again, Marcy. Oh, and please be sure to return the plastic container when you are done. I've donated so many of those to other people and rarely ever get any of them back. I'll be sure to bring it back to you as soon as I can." I smiled and went back inside to leave the cookies. I got out again and drove down the empty street. Immediately to my left in the distance on a hill, I noticed a big tower of some sorts. It looked like a radio tower since it had an antenna on top, so I didn't give it too much thought. I went to my company's office, which was only a few minutes' drive away from my house. The office looked exactly like back in my city, so that made me feel homey. The coworkers welcomed me, and we talked briefly before I headed out. It was around 8 p.m. when I returned home, and night had already fallen. I wanted to make some dinner, so I decided to walk down to a nearby store and buy something simple like frozen pizza or whatever. I waltzed down the street, spinning my car keys around my finger. On my way there, I ran into Jim and his wife. "Hey, Chris, how was your first day here?" Jim grinned again. "This is my wife, Sarah, by the way." I shook her hand and we talked a bit. "So I was just telling Sarah about you," he said. "We haven't seen a new face in, well, it must have been years." Just then, a young man in sportswear who was jogging ran past us, saying hi to us in passing. "It's true," Sarah smiles as well. "But whoever comes here usually never leaves. They just love the peacefulness of the town. I mean, who would want to live in a big city with so much pollution and traffic jams anyway, right?" I saw Clara come out the front door of her house behind Jim and Sarah, taking out the trash. She waved and I waved back. "Now, honey, it has its pluses as well," Jim interjected. Just then, I saw a red light blinking in the distance. It didn't take me long to realize it was coming from the radio tower. I stared at the red light and asked, "Hey, Jim, what's with that tower over there? Is that a radio station?" I pointed at the tower, squinting my eyes. I got no response from Jim, so I repeated my question. "Jim, that tower, what exactly—" I stopped my question halfway through when I looked at Jim. He and Sarah were no longer smiling and were instead staring over my shoulder, wide-eyed, with a blank facial expression. "Jim?" I asked and looked behind to see what they were staring at. What I saw only put my nerves on edge even more. The jogger from before stood motionless in the middle of the street facing away from me, just like Jim and Sarah. I saw with my peripheral vision that an old man who was sitting on this porch was staring in the same direction as the other three residents. I turned back to Jim and Sarah and saw Clara behind them, still standing in front of her house, still holding the trash bag. She was blankly staring in the same direction over my shoulder. I felt my heart racing 1,000,000 miles an hour, but I was frozen in place, afraid to make any sudden moves. Very slowly, I took a step back, and then in all that mess, my trembling hands managed to drop my car keys on the ground with a loud clatter. The sound echoed in a painfully loud manner, and instantly, all residents turned their gazes towards me. I froze in place again, not sure what would happen next. I wanted to run, but was rooted. Jim and Sarah were not blinking, and the longer I stared at them, the more I realized they were entirely motionless, like statues. Slowly, I took a few more steps back, and they followed me with their unblinking gazes twisting their necks in my direction but not moving their bodies. I couldn't bear their penetrating stares, so I looked down at my shoes and slowly took step by step. For example, you can find all the big stores anywhere in the big city, unlike here, Jim suddenly said. When I looked back at them, they seemed to be back to normal all of a sudden, smiling again. I looked over their shoulders at Clara and saw that she was placing the trash bag in the can and heading back inside. I frantically turned around and saw that the jogger continued running, and the old man on the porch was gone. "Hey, Chris, you okay, buddy?" Jim asked. I turned back to him and stared, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I probably seemed like a lunatic staring at him and sweating bullets. "Maybe you're just stressed from moving. You should go home and get some rest," Sarah said with concern. "We gotta go pick up the kids. You be good now, okay?" Jim patted me on the shoulder and the two of them left. I looked at the radio tower and realized the red light had stopped blinking entirely. I didn't hear Michael at first. The noise of the mower filled my head like a swarm of angry wasps, drowning everything else out. I was filling off the last strip of grass, closest to my neighbor's wall. Being as quick as I could, the last hint of light was bleeding out of the sky, and I wanted to get back inside as soon as I could. A beer in front of the TV was calling. But when I reached the far end of the garden and cut the power, I heard a voice behind me. "Paul?" I jumped slightly. You know when you're so caught up in your head you forget your surroundings? My wife is back from holiday tomorrow. She's been off in Spain with a couple of her friends for the past week, and I'd been thinking about my plan to meet her at the airport. Timings, when I'd need to leave, all that. I was in my own little bubble. The voice floating over from my neighbor's garden punctured through it. I turned from the mower and stared over the low wall into the garden next to mine. I couldn't see anything at first. The sky was mostly dark overhead, and the only light spilling into the gardens came from the single street lamp on the road behind my house. It did little to shift the shadows. "Over here." I shifted my gaze and finally saw him. Michael, my new next-door neighbor. I'm pretty bad at guessing kids' ages, but I reckon he has to be around 10. He's got a shock of messy black hair and these big brown eyes. The kid's a starer, too. I've only seen him a couple of times since he and his mom moved in last week, but every time I do, he gazes at me like I'm an animal in the zoo. It's a little annoying. This was the first time he'd actually spoken to me, though. "Oh, hey, Michael, is it?" I actually knew his name perfectly well. I'd bumped into the estate agent selling the house next door and he told me, but I didn't want to appear over-familiar. "Yeah, I'm Michael. And you're Paul," my mom said. "That's me. How are you guys settling in?" "Okay, I guess." Michael stared up at me with those large brown eyes of his. I don't have much cause to talk to kids, so I may have been completely wrong about this. But I had a feeling Michael was making a lot more eye contact than someone his age normally would. He hardly even blinked. Young kids, at least in my limited experience, tend to be all over the place. Little bags of energy. But Michael was the exact opposite. It's probably close to his bedtime, I found myself thinking. And then, off the back of that, you want to be glad he's not bouncing off the walls. If he was one of those kids, you'd never get any peace. Amazingly, considering they were still in the early moving stage, I'd barely heard a peep out of Michael and his mother. I'd been expecting to hear the sound of furniture shifting and boxes being lugged around all week, but I hadn't. They'd hardly made any noise at all. I'd hardly seen them at all, for that matter. They'd arrived late one evening the previous week, and I'd caught a glimpse of them through the window of my study. But that was pretty much it. I remember Michael's mom as a tall, attractive woman who looked a little older than me, but I hardly even got a proper look at her face. And this conversation with Michael was the first interaction I'd had with either of them. I'll go round at some point when Beth's back home, I thought now, folding down the mower's handle. Then we can introduce ourselves properly. So, Michael, I said, picking up the mower and carrying it back along the garden. What are you and your mom up to this evening? I'm guessing it must be close to your bedtime soon. Nah, nowhere near, he said. I chuckled. Okay, well, my bedtime's pretty early, so I'm going to head in and catch a bit of TV, I reckon. I'll see you around, yeah? I reached the little wooden storage area at the end of the garden and slotted the mower underneath. I was on my way to the back door when Michael's voice stopped me. Paul? What's up, mate? Do you always mow the garden so late? I smiled. No, I usually try to get it done when the sun's still out. Only my wife's back home tomorrow, and I wanted to get the place looking nice for her. I guess it must look pretty odd to be out here mowing at night, eh? Nah, I don't think so. I think everything's more fun at night. Oh, yeah? Yeah, I go on adventures all the time. I could hear the excitement in Michael's voice, even though I couldn't see his face properly. It was just a shadowy outline in the darkness of his garden. One time, we even went night fishing. Have you ever been? I shook my head. I've been fishing once or twice, but only during the day. It's way more fun at night, I reckon. Everything's more sneaky at night. I found myself grinning again. Despite my urge to go back inside, the kid was sort of entertaining. Well, maybe you and your mom can show me and my wife sometime. Sounds like you guys are way more exciting than we are. I turned once more to the back door. This time, I was actually holding the handle when Michael's voice stopped me. Paul? Yes, buddy. Paul, do you have anything to drink? Like juice or anything? I hesitated. Not sure. I don't think I... Do you mind if I have a glass real quick? Mom's still sleeping and she's been super tired this week. I don't want to wake her. I paused with my hand on the door. If Beth had been in, I probably would have said yes straight away, likely without even thinking about it. But standing there in the dark garden, I was suddenly aware that it might look a little bit odd if I invited a 10-year-old kid into my house, even if he was my next-door neighbor. And I doubted his mom would like the idea all that much. Do you not have anything to drink at your place, mate? My hand was still on the door, but I hadn't turned the handle yet. I stayed in the same position, my mind whirring with excuses. And when I heard a voice directly behind me, I almost jumped out of my skin. No, we don't have anything. I spun round and found Michael standing about a foot away from me, staring up at me with those large brown eyes of his. The kid must have clambered over the garden wall while my back was turned. Must have done it without making a sound. Please, Paul? Just a super quick drink and then I'll go back home. I won't even sit down, I promise. I made a quick mental calculation in my head. Our back doors opened straight into the kitchen, and I had orange juice in the fridge. Michael would probably be in and out in a couple of minutes. His mom might find it a little odd that he'd been inside the house if he told her, but wouldn't she find it just as odd if her new neighbor had refused her kid a drink when he asked? I hesitated for a couple more seconds, then sighed. Okay, go on then. But you have to make it quick, okay? I really do want to go to bed soon. Michael smiled up at me and nodded. I turned the handle and stepped inside. So you're a bit of a night owl, huh? What does that mean? I opened the fridge and grabbed the orange juice. It means someone who prefers it at night. You know, because you said you go on adventures, night fishing and stuff. I moved to the drying rack by the sink and grabbed a glass. Oh yeah, I'm definitely a night owl. I started pouring juice into the glass. Man, not me. Or at least I wasn't when I was your age. I used to be scared of the dark. You'll get used to it. Hmm? I said you get used to it once you spend enough time in it. Right. I turned and handed the glass of orange juice to Michael. He took it from me and smiled. He moved the glass towards his mouth, then paused, watching me over the rim. You know, my mom doesn't like me doing this anymore. Doing what? Going into houses with strangers, not after the last time. I stared down at the kid, and he looked back up at me, the smile no longer on his face. Somewhere down in my stomach, I felt something uncomfortable squirm. What do you mean, mate? What happened last time? Michael glanced over his shoulder at the closed back door, as if he was checking to make sure his mom wasn't there. He moved the glass of orange juice away from his mouth and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then he shrugged. Nothing really. It's just that in the place we used to live, I made friends with this old man who lived a couple roads over from us. He invited me in for a drink too, only then he got weird. Oh, Jesus. I tried to keep my expression the same, but I was suddenly wishing I'd said no to the kid's drink request after all. This didn't sound good. Some old pervert in his last town had invited him in for a drink, and then he'd got weird. How was his mom going to feel about him being on his own in my house now, given that something bad had clearly happened in the last place they lived? He got weird? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I should have just sent the kid packing then and there, but I guess my curiosity got the better of me. Michael shuffled on the spot, staring back at me. Yeah, he wanted me to come down to the basement with him. Told me he had this really cool Lego collection and asked if I wanted to see it. He insisted I see it, even when I said I had to go. My mouth suddenly felt dry. So, did you go with him? Michael shook his head back and forth hard. No way! I ran back home. Mom told me I have to only go as far as the kitchen when I'm in a stranger's house. I felt mild relief wash over me. Then I replayed what Michael had just said and felt the relief being replaced with confusion. Wait, how do you mean? I asked. Are you in strangers' houses a lot then? Like friends of your mom's and stuff? Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. He turned and moved his hand back to the glass of orange juice on the kitchen side. But instead of picking it up, he only prodded it with his finger, sliding it over the surface. When he looked back at me, he carried on speaking as if he hadn't heard my question. Mom was really angry when she found out about the man. She made me promise I'd never, ever go back there. Did she tell anyone? About what that man said to you, I mean? No way. Michael looked away from me again. There was a slight smile on his face, like he was in on some joke I wouldn't understand. She did something way better than that. Oh yeah? What did she do? She made him disappear. I had my mouth open to ask another question when I realized what Michael had just said. The next thought I had was that I must have misheard him. What did you say? I said she made him disappear. I told you, night's the best time to hunt. Michael fixed me with those brown eyes of his. Only right then they looked darker than brown, almost black. I tried to find the words, but I was at a loss. Michael smiled up at me. It's funny, he said after a moment. People think Mom won't come in unless she's invited, but they've got the rules all wrong. As long as one of us has already been invited, then it's fine. She can come back with me anytime she wants." The kid smiled at me once more. "Don't worry, Paul. I'll tell her you were nice to me. Make sure she goes easy on you when you meet her. Thanks for the juice." He turned away and pulled the back door open. I found my eyes wandering over to the glass of orange juice, my mind vaguely aware that he hadn't touched a drop of it. But when Michael spoke one more time, I turned back to him. He was framed in the open doorway, half lost in the night. "It'll take some getting used to," he said. "But you won't be scared of the dark much longer." Before I had a chance to reply, he'd melted into the shadows.